That much mass with that much velocity is about 100 million megatons of energy. And a megaton is an average size hydrogen bomb. So 100 million hydrogen bombs of energy.
The 6-mile wide asteroid caused damage on a biblical scale.
All of that energy of motion was converted into heat. It vaporized a huge amount of seawater. It created a tremendous plume of vaporized water and molten rock as it hit the Earth's crust.
There were tidal waves, tsunamis, that may have been hundreds of meters high. The Earth shook, equivalent to what they call a magnitude 12 earthquake. It splashed debris around the entire planet, which came back down into the atmosphere and heated up like shooting stars with about 20 million megatons of energy.
Within a few hours of impact, fires were raging across every continent. It was literally hell on Earth. Can an asteroid trigger an apocalypse? It may already have, just not for mankind. The evidence is clear. An asteroid collision could happen, so it's not a question of if, but when. The Arecibo Observatory has been tracking objects in our solar system since 1963. It is still the largest telescope on the planet. Unlike optical telescopes, radio telescopes like Arecibo make their observations electronically, similar to how radar works.
We have a 1 megawatt radar system, possibly the most powerful radar system on Earth, that we use to track asteroids and get very precise information about the trajectory of these asteroids. And therefore, we can indeed improve our knowledge of the orbit of these objects, and we can tell whether an object poses a danger or not.
What they're finding is startling to religious and scientific communities alike.
The objects that are dangerous to us are the ones that are big enough to do substantial damage. Those are taken to be the ones that are sort of 500 feet across and larger. Of the 500-foot size, there's 10,000 to 20,000, I'd say. And we know where maybe somewhere between 10 and 30% of those are.
By a conservative estimate, 7 to 14,000 unaccounted asteroids pose a threat to Earth. One as small as 100 yards across can still destroy a city the size of Tokyo. If one of these asteroids fulfills the wormwood prophecy, if it is one of the 7 signs, it would be an apocalypse unlike anything else in human history.
So if you have an asteroid that's a couple of 100 yards across, it's the size of an entire football stadium, and it comes in, it'll pass through the Earth's atmosphere and it gets very hot. So if you were standing, say, in New York City and it were going to impact there, you would look up and you would see this huge ball of light going across the sky. You would feel the heat from it. It would be like standing underneath an extra sun.
As the wormwood asteroid gets closer, the heat will intensify.
It would get hotter and hotter and hotter, and it would be like sticking your head in the oven and turning it on broil. You would actually catch on fire. The buildings would be set on fire.
Within seconds, every building in Manhattan will be set ablaze. But the fire won't last long.
That fire would be put out almost instantly when the rock actually hit the ground.
The wormwood asteroid will gouge out an enormous crater.
And there would be a huge shock wave which would just knock down buildings for miles around. The pressure wave, the heat, and all of this together would probably completely destroy Manhattan Island.
Wormwood hits with such incredible impact that a third of all marine life is destroyed, and coastlines are destroyed.
It poisons the sea, it kills people, it kills plants, it kills animals, and so there's tremendous devastation, and it's global.
Some of the most devastating human impact may unfold in the days and years after an asteroid hits. A phenomenon that's called impact winter.
A lot of the ejecta, the material that's been excavated from the crater, can actually obscure sunlight. And enough sunlight can be obscured that you could actually shut down photosynthesis, and plants would die and the entire food chain would be disrupted.
You're talking about deaths on an unimaginable scale, huge impact to the global economy, tremendous amounts of areas where food won't be able to be grown. And so you're talking about long-term effects, not just the instant effects of the impact, but long-term effects that could go on for years.
Death from the heavens can happen, almost as the prophet John describes in the book of Revelation. It is only the beginning of the journey toward the ultimate biblical apocalypse. Believers in the seven signs and scientists both agree a plague that could kill millions may just be a matter of time. The seven signs prophecy describes horrifying disasters. But for those who believe in the end times, God unleashes all his fury, and the worst is on the way. Disease. It's been feared by every civilization since the dawn of man. Even today, humanity is still terrorized by several epidemic diseases. Severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS, struck 29 countries. Since 1972, malaria has killed nearly 100 million people, and an avian flu strain could set off a worldwide pandemic at any moment. The common thread? They could all be linked to one of the seven signs.
And I looked, and beheld a pale horse, and his name was Death.
It's one of the most frightening signs in the entire prophecy.
Throughout the book of Revelation, there are numerous analogies of what I believe are plagues. The first and foremost being the pale horse. I believe that the pale horse represents the release of diseases and plagues on planet Earth.
I see plague as a certainty. Yeah, it seems like it's just a matter of time before we suffer again.
The forces of hell are being unleashed. You have plagues, you have diseases, you have death of almost every type, to the point that the Bible describes 1/4 of the Earth's population perishing.
A quarter of the world. Well over 1 billion deaths. It's a difficult number to comprehend. Is there really anything out there that can cause humanity to suffer on this scale? Once again, scientists provide the hard data.
Every 10 years, you're going to get a very bad strain of a virus. Every 100 years, you're going to get a catastrophic pandemic virus. We know this. It's not something that's new. All you have to do is look at your history.
History. Our past is a long timeline of plagues and pandemics dating back to the beginnings of recorded time. During the time John of Patmos writes the book of Revelation, around 100 AD, plagues strike in the areas of modern-day Libya, Egypt, and Syria, very near the island of Patmos itself. It's even possible that John has direct knowledge of these outbreaks. But the deadliest plague of them all hits during the Middle Ages, the Black Death. The bubonic plague slashes through Europe in the 1340s, killing between 25 and 50 million people. The disease causes large, painful black swellings called buboes, which give the plague its name. By the year 1400, the death toll reaches 100 million worldwide and reduces the Earth's population from roughly 450 million to as little as 350 million. As might happen today, some victims looked for answers in the Bible and believed the plague to be the punishment of a wrathful God.
The Black Death was invested with spiritual meanings at the time that Europeans were afflicted by this plague. It was the classic form of punishment that God brings down on earth, not only in Revelation, but even in the account of the 10 plagues in Egypt during the Exodus. So the use of plague as evidence of God's displeasure is an old tradition and can be found very prominently in the book of Revelation.
As survivors gain immunity, the Black Death recedes. But fear of the killer bug continues for centuries. The worst pandemic in modern times begins in 1918, just as the most destructive war in human history is ending. Doctors call it the Spanish flu. It's a deadly influenza that sweeps the world and kills an estimated 20 to 100 million people, making the Spanish flu more than twice as deadly as World War I.
It's not really known where it actually started, but what we now think happened is that an avian bird flu virus mutated where it could be transmitted from person to person and just spread throughout the world very rapidly.
An avian virus. If it sounds familiar, it should. Today, scientists are worried about another avian flu strand, a virus called H5. And this time, the danger is even greater.
If that virus mutates and now can actually infect humans and be transmitted from human to human, that's a grand disaster. We're talking 50, 100, 150 million people can die from this.
Just like during the 1918 pandemic, a mutated H5 flu will be easily communicable between humans. But today, we live in a much smaller world. Infection could be out of control before we even realize it's upon us.
We have created the highway for these bugs to go all over the world on a day-to-day basis.
A person gets on a plane who is incubating a pandemic influenza. It has a 2-day incubation period. They arrive somewhere else in the world that doesn't suspect that a pandemic has started, and transmission could be going on for a while before it's detected. And this could be happening in multiple areas of the world.
Just the amount of people coming through LAX, how quickly can one person infect everybody else on that plane, and then all of us around them walk through the gates of LAX, and everybody who comes into contact with us is then exposed. Then I go home and my family and my daily life. Once that happens, we have no immunity. We have nothing.
The symptoms of H5 start off innocuously enough that an infected person might not have any idea of the danger.
The first symptoms of a pandemic virus would probably be similar to regular influenza: fever, cough, muscle aches.
You would have maybe a runny nose, some teary eyes, a sore throat.
But the symptoms progress rapidly.
Your muscles hurt, your throat is sore, you start coughing, next thing you know you have trouble breathing.
There would be rapid progression, shortness of breath,
cardiac arrest, renal failure.
It's about 4 days from when symptoms develop to when you get in a hospital, and it's about 9 days to when you die.
But as dire as these predictions appear, avian flu may not even be our greatest danger. The most threatening plague may have more sinister origins.
The pale horse, I believe, represents death, but I believe it represents a specific kind of death, and I believe it represents the death that would come from biological warfare, either through an act of terrorism, through a security breach, through military conflict. A vial cracks, a truck crashes, it goes into the food supply. Numerous biologically designed plagues are released on planet Earth. There's no remedy for them. They spread like wildfire. Millions of people are going to die.
What if we had something that couldn't be contained? It would take 1, 2, 3 hosts to infect an entire population? Easily. Easily.
As an expert on weapons of mass destruction, John Barton understands the threat today's bioengineered viruses pose.
With the way bioengineering is adapting right now, I think that is our largest threat. Biological weapons systems are only limited by their delivery measure.
It's pretty easy to actually do a bioterrorist attack. Most of these are invisible, they're odorless, they're tasteless, and we don't even know how to respond to bioterrorism. We usually don't have antivirals or treatment ready to go because a lot of times we don't even know what it is. It takes a while until we figure out what it is that we're actually working with, the agent.
Let's say you have a terrorist cell. You have an engineered virus. It just has to get airborne. A biological released into the air on another human being in a high-density populated area like Los Angeles and New York, you're going to infect everybody. I mean, you're going to achieve your end. With the amount of travel that Americans do, with the amount of border crossing that the Europeans do, we can easily perpetuate a strain globally within weeks.